She pushed past me. Her shoulder clipped my chest. "You're overthinking everything," she said without stopping. The hallway swallowed the rest. I had asked why the office drawer was locked. Simple. A yes or a no would have done. She chose motion instead. Her hand shook the keys into her bag, metal on metal, fast. "I'm late," she added, eyes on the doorframe. The word thudded, not meant for me. "It's one drawer," I said still. Her mouth flattened. Her gaze skipped over my head like I was furniture. She adjusted the strap twice, then a third time, a small hitch in the loop. The action bought seconds she didn't use. The bag thudded off her hip. Her phone lit inside the bag. She pressed the screen through the fabric and dimmed it. The light died like a swallowed thought. "I wasn't accusing you," I said, watching her hands, not her face. She forced a laugh that didn't rise. It landed between us and stayed there. She stepped to the shoe rack and slipped on flats without bending, toes shoving blind. She fixed them only when they scraped. The laces stayed loose. Her voice had a new edge. Not volume. Finish. Each word polished smooth so nothing stuck. They slid right off the point. She reached for the coat, then stopped, and smoothed the sleeve back into place on the hook. A rehearsed gesture. No coat. No commitment to leaving. "You're making something out of nothing," she said, softer now, palms open, wrists turned. The open hand stayed open, waiting for a different topic. I glanced past her at the office door. The keyhole blinked from inside the shadow. Her eyes followed the move and snapped back. "Too quick. We can talk tonight," she offered, eyes on the floorboards, spacing the words. The promise hovered with no address. It had nowhere to land. I nodded once and stepped aside. She didn't move. The pause stretched, thin as a wire. It hummed. She finally walked, not to the door, but to the kitchen. She turned a switch that was already off. The click pretended to matter. The house inhaled as if a window opened. Nothing did. She stood there, posture tall, spine like a measure. Silence did the counting. I didn't follow. I let the distance set. I let her settle into it. The air hardened between rooms. "Drop it," she said, level, the words placed one by one. She didn't look up. Precision was her shield. I kept my hands at my sides. No argument, no raise. Only the door at the end of the hall, closed, quiet, faithful. She tucked a loose strand behind her ear and missed it. The hair held anyway. She didn't try again. I let her have the last word. I gave the nod she wanted. Then I turned toward the office. The answer was on the other side of that lock. The key turned without effort. The latch didn't protest. She had trusted the lock and the evening dishwater. I stepped in and let the door find its frame behind me. The clicks sounded clean. Her office never drifted. Pens aligned. Cables coiled. The blinds cut the street into even strips. The printer tray held one sheet, face down, corner peeking past the lip. It was the only thing not squared. I lifted it with 2 fingers. A lease form stared back, black on white. Midtown Storage. Unit C13. Start date 3 days ago. Access code printed bold and neat. No ragged edges. No smudge. Her signature was there, tight and practiced. Same loop, different pressure. Emergency contact under it, not my number. A name I knew from her email subject lines, not our table. The page pulsed without sound. The laptop glowed, then demanded a password. I tried the one we used for years. Then the backup she swore she'd never change. The box shook its head twice and went still. She had time to change it. I placed the lease back face down, half an inch higher than I'd found it. The corner now touched the tray's edge. The small shift would scrape her eye later. I left the mouse angled wrong by degrees. The top drawer wasn't flush. I pressed it in, let it kiss the face of the desk, then set the slightest gap with my thumb. The air moved through the crack like it mattered. She would notice or deny. Her voice reached in soft from the kitchen. Glass met porcelain. She filled the sink, stopped at the line she always watched. Water stilled in the pipes. "Did you print something?" I asked, stepping back into the hall, shoulder brushing the wall. She didn't turn. "Work forms," she said, wrists deep, sleeves pushed to the elbows. She let the water swallow the clink. The faucet kept running. "What's tomorrow?" I asked, leaning on the doorframe, counting the drip from the sponge to the basin. "Workshop," she said, eyes on a ring of soap. "Late." She pressed the sponge flat until it bled clear. She didn't ask why. "I'll be at the office," I said, not moving from the frame. She nodded once toward the window, as if checking the dark. The ring on her hand turned and then clicked back. She shut off the water and stood still long enough for the heater to catch. The pipes woke, settled, hummed. She reached for a towel she didn't need. The cotton squeaked against dry skin. I waited for the bathroom door to close. It closed like it always did, 2 inches from the jamb, then a hand, then the last inch. The lock thumbed. Steam hit tile. The bag was where I kept it, under the bench, strap tucked. Keys in the front pocket, car fob cold. I took my phone and pointed it at the lease. The shutter didn't speak. I set the paper down as before, wrong by the same half-inch. The drawer sat with its patient gap. The mouse aimed at the corner. The office breathed the same measured air. The front door caught once and then gave. The hallway had no light. The elevator hummed like a held breath. Unit C13 would not move while I was on my way. Floor numbers slid past like held breath. I watched the seam of the doors instead of my reflection. When they opened, the hall gave me nothing. C13 waited with its brushed steel eye. I touched the peephole with my knuckle. Cold glass, no heat. I bent to the jamb and saw no line of light. The lock turned without a protest. Inside was clean darkness and machine air. A fan ticked somewhere, disciplined, small. I let the door rest on the latch and kept my hand on it. The room accepted me. Phone face down in my palm, I raised a thin glow. A folding table. A monitor sleeping. A black lens filling it. Cables braided with care. It wasn't furnished. It was rigged. The router wore a strip of tape with 5 neat letters. The same letters flashed on our TV when it lost signal. A paper scrap held a password like a prayer. Under it, a cup ring still wet. I found the switch with my shoe and pressed gently. The monitor opened on a grid I knew by furniture, not by thumbnails. Our couch from above. Our office from the corner. Our bed, framed and obedient. The office feed showed the drawer gap I'd left like a bruise. The mouse's little nose stared into its assigned corner. A reflection caught my phone, lifted, then lowered. She had counted on my restraint. I scrolled. Time stamped itself with thin blue slashes. Earlier, a hand entered the office frame and lifted the smoke detector like fruit. No face, just the edge of her sleeve, the one with the stitched cuff. She dressed the room like a stage. I touched the headphones and they gave me warmth back. The chair leg had a shine from a recent knee. The cup ring smeared when I put my finger in it. Minutes, not hours. Under the table sat a small box with an SD slot. The card wore today's date in tidy ink. I kept my breath shallow as I pressed and pocketed it. The recording belonged with me now. The elevator chimed in the hall, then feet slowed by the threshold. I killed the screens and walked the chair back to its shadow. I stood behind the bathroom door with the hinge against my knuckles. The latch slipped with care. She entered like she lived here. No perfume. No sound but the door easing shut. Her head tipped toward the table, a hawk over a field. Her hand went to the mouse and set it by degree. She opened the little drawer and stopped at the empty slot. Her shoulders didn't move. Her phone lit her throat and then went face down again. I let the door breathe and stepped into her angle. She didn't gasp. The room shrank to the space between us and the table. Unit C13, I said, and set my keys where the cup's ring had been. Her eyes went to the keys like they were writing. You shouldn't be here, she said, not looking up. The screen reflected a small moon in her cornea and then went dark. You told me I overthink, I said, and took my hand off the door. She watched the monitor instead of me. That isn't what this is, she said, voice low enough to miss. Her thumb erased a print from the table she had just made. You misled me, I said, and placed the card inside my sleeve. The router clicked once in the silence. She set both palms flat on the table and then removed them, leaving nothing. We can go upstairs, she said, almost to the wall. Her mouth stayed still. We're already upstairs, I said, and turned the chair a 1/4 inch back to her angle. The room held its pose. I nudged the chair flush to the table. Her eyes tracked it, then looked past me. The router clicked and held green. It stayed awake. I stood. She drew her foot back like it had been seen. Not upstairs, I said. The card warmed against my wrist. I took the hall light and we crossed to the guest room. I knelt by the desk leg where the tape had left a dull rectangle. She stayed in the frame of the door. I opened the drawer and found the empty mount. I set it on the desk between us. I slid the card from my sleeve. We watched it together. In my office the screen woke. She held the jam with 2 fingers like it could argue for her. I fed the card in and waited. The fan lifted. Folders stacked by date. Last night sat on top. I opened it and hit play. The cursor skimmed once and stopped. The entryway flickered up in blue. 2:14 a.m. She opened the door without the chain. A shoulder entered, jacket with a stitched white bar. She placed the key in his palm. He touched her forearm once. She didn't step back. He left. She wiped the knob with her sleeve and watched the door. I paused. She stepped in but kept distance. "It's not what you think," she said to the wall. The frame didn't answer. I pointed at the jacket. "Utility. They don't take keys at 2 a.m. Her throat moved once. The router clicked down the hall. I opened older folders. Same hour. Same shoulder. The key went out and came back. I stopped before the next frame. "Phone," I said, hand out. She hesitated, then went to the drawer with the chargers. I took it and held. "Code." She gave 6 numbers without looking up. I unlocked a thread with no name. Door times. Short lines. "Tonight." The bubble blinked and died. "He's coming back," I said. She exhaled a thin yes that wasn't a word. "You're overthinking everything," she said steady. I walked to the router and pulled the plug. The lights stayed on. Everything else dropped. The hum in the walls quit, and the air laid flat. I wrapped the cord around my hand until the plastic bit. She stood by the counter with her arms tucked in. The house listened. I set her phone under the stockpot lid and pressed it down with my palm. The lid clicked tight on metal. She watched my hand like it might change its mind. No glow. No tone. No exit ramp. The hooks by the door had one empty space. I opened her bag on the table and shook it once. Keys slid out with a receipt and a slim pen. I pocketed the keys and folded the bag back to neat. Entry now required me. I killed the porch light and left the lamp over the sink. The hall gave me a slice of black to stand in. I took the heavy flashlight from the drawer and rolled it once to feel the weight. I wanted to see first. She trailed to the doorway and touched the jamb with 2 fingers. "This isn't you," she said small, without moving her mouth. I held up the phone thread with the times and the blank name. She dropped her hand and watched the wood grain. She was looking at the exit, not me. A car idled down and stopped without the engine cutting. Headlights dragged across the ceiling and died. She didn't blink. The house took the sound and held it. Tires settled on gravel. The keypad on the deadbolt lit when the handle tested. A polite touch. 4 tones, then red. He knew numbers, not the chain. The door flexed and went still. I leaned to the peephole and saw a slice of shoulder, no face. He stood close enough to fog the glass, but didn't. She breathed shallow behind my sleeve and eased back like distance might reduce mass. We waited and counted nothing. From the pot came a muted rattle and a brave little buzz that tried twice. I lifted the lid. 1 line on the screen. "Here." No name. No punctuation. He wrote like he lived here. I typed with her thumbs and kept it short. "Back." The send spun, then turned solid. She took 1 step and half spoke my name. I closed the pot, set it down, and moved down the hall. I sent him around the dark side. The mudroom smelled like wet rubber and old soap. I stood where the window couldn't frame me and cut the flashlight. Footsteps came off the driveway and found the flagstones by memory. A hand patted the siding until it met the glass. He knew the seam. The shape at the pane leaned forward and turned his head to aim an ear at quiet. He made himself flat to listen and raised his knuckles to test the door. The room held its breath around us. I kept my hand off the lock. His knuckles brushed the glass once, then hovered. The pane took his breath and gave none back. He pressed his ear to the seam and tasted the quiet. He knew we were there. A pulse hummed against my thigh. Her phone. She reached without looking and I closed my hand on her wrist. Outside, his head shifted toward the sound. He tapped the glass in a small rhythm I recognized too late. They had a signal. He slid something thin along the weather strip. Plastic or a blade. I set my palm flat against the door and leaned the weight into the frame. Pressure met pressure. The contact sensor made a faint tick where the wires met. He paused and spoke a name soft enough to be swallowed by the house. He didn't use mine. She stepped once toward the handle and then stopped when I shook my head. Her fingers curled back into her sleeve. She cut her eyes past me toward the hallway like a path she wanted me to clear. Outside, the footsteps let go of the stone and found the path to the side gate. He knew the trick to kill the squeal. I moved to the front hall without turning on a light. Through the slit of the sidelight I watched him cross the garden and go straight to the third planter. He lifted it, hand already positioned under the lip. His shoulders sank when it came up empty. He'd used that key before. Her screen lit the room from my pocket. 2 words in a preview slid under her name. No names attached to the number. She looked at me and then looked down at the floorboards. I slid the phone deeper into my pocket. I let it burn between us. He tried the garage keypad next. 4 beeps, a pause, then 4 more. Wrong sequence. He stood there and let the red light stare at him. He could wait longer than locks. How long? I asked, watching him turn back toward the deck. She wiped her thumb along the edge of the counter as if there were crumbs I couldn't see. Months, she said, keeping her mouth barely open. It was a simple clock with no hands. He came back to the glass and pressed something flat against it. A metallic clink when he let go. Not a note. A key, old brass, my old notch pattern. He placed it with care and stepped backward into the yard. He was done knocking. I set the dowel in the track and felt its seat. The bar was always there. Tonight it belonged. In the mudroom I took the heavy flashlight and laid it by the frame. Spare room, I said, not raising my voice. He didn't have to come back. The yard took him in again. No light, no engine, just the long, clean exit of a man walking away from a house he'd learned too well. She stood in the archway and hugged her elbows without touching herself. We had a key on the mat and a hole in the floor. The rest could wait for daylight. I picked up the key from the mat. Cold brass, new cut. I set it on the table beside the bills. We weren't waiting. She stayed in the archway. Her arms crossed but not tight. I put the flashlight in her hands and went to my knees. Hold it, I said, and pointed at the seam. She kept the beam on the wood, not the gap. The board lifted with a dry pulp. Cool air came up and found my wrist. Something metal hid in the dust. Splinters took skin. Stop, she said, not moving closer. The light shook once and steadied. I kept my arm in. We had enough visitors. My hand found a box and a wire edge. I dragged a small tin through insulation and grit. The lid showed a thumb worn over time. The print had its own shine. On the floor, between us, it looked small. Please, she said, almost quiet enough to miss. I turned the mat key in the lock without hurry. The key knew the cut. The latch gave. Inside, a hotel card, 2 metal keys tagged with numbers, a folded paper, a phone battery with tape, and a memory card in a plastic sleeve. No wallet things. Nothing soft. Everything matched something else. I opened the paper. Dates. Times. Cross streets. A name once, mine, underlined then scratched out hard. It was a schedule, not a note. She stared past me, as if waiting for the yard again. I was going to tell you, she said, fingers white on the flashlight. Her timing had a script. When, I said, watching her mouth open and then retreat. The floor took the rest. After you stopped asking, she said, eyes on the numbers. Her answer attempted to shift blame. I lifted the hotel card. The back was scuffed near the strip. Since when, I said, turning it once. The dates lined up in my head. Since winter, she said, the beams sliding to my shoes. That was when you became distant. The memory card weighed nothing. Where's the phone it belongs to? I said, tapping the battery. The tape clicked under my nail. She didn't answer. Her chin dipped once, like a nod she couldn't finish. The yard had already taken the rest. I slid the paper and card into my pocket. The keys stayed on the floor, bright in the tremble of her light. We leave at first light, I said, standing. The house agreed by staying quiet. She set the flashlight down and rubbed her palms on her skirt. To where? She asked, not looking for an answer. I pointed at the card and the tag numbers. We were going where she kept time. I pushed the tin back into the void and set the board. A chair went over it, leg square on the seam. I turned the deadbolt with the house key, not the mat key. Locks were for us now. Upstairs, the spare room door was open and the bed was made. His pillow on the floor from earlier, a dent I hadn't seen. I closed the door and kept my hand on the knob. He had learned quickly. Back in the hall, she waited against the banister. No words trying to fill space. Just the house breathing. You can't drag this out, she said, voice steady. This wasn't dragging. This was measure. I let go of the knob and passed her. The hallway gave me our smell and the stale heat from the spare room. She watched my shoulder, not my face. Downstairs, the console held her phone under a pile of mail. I set the mail aside and held my hand out. She exhaled once and placed the phone on my palm. The lock screen asked for numbers. She rubbed her thumb against the banister and said them carefully. I entered them and felt the false cleanliness. No photos. No voicemail. Messages trimmed. It had a shine that didn't match the dust on the charging port. I put the phone on the step between us and took the card from my pocket. White plastic. Thin groove down one edge. The hotel crest in navy that we had never used. Her eyes dropped, then steadied elsewhere. The card caught the hall light and threw it back flat. I flipped it. The imprint still fresh. Yesterday's date pressed shallow. I set it on the step and pressed it with my finger to stop the shake in the card. She shifted off the banister and folded her arms, as if waiting for air to move. I didn't give it to her. I dialed the number on the back with her phone and asked reception to transfer me. My voice was even. The receiver clicked, and the line rang twice into a man's breath. He said hello like he was looking at the door. I ended the call and watched the battery icon. It returned to stillness. She blinked longer than necessary. The skin at her jaw tightened and loosened. She pressed her lips together, adjusting an unseen seam. In the kitchen I filled the kettle and clicked it on. The sound covered both of us until the first boil hit the metal. I checked the back door and slid the bolt. I took the spare room pillow from the stairs and set it by the front door. The dent where his head had been faced the glass. It sat clean, like an invitation had a shape. You want him here, she said, her voice straight. She kept her palms flattened against her arms so they wouldn't show anything. I want the weight to be visible, I said, and opened the side gate with its stiff hinge. The night air came through and made the hallway cooler. I put her phone on the mantel where she couldn't reach it without passing me. The kettle clicked off. I left the water inside it and let it cool. The street was a glossary of known sounds. Tires on the wet. A laugh 2 houses down. A fox at the bins. I waited until the pattern broke. Her hand went to her throat and then away. She took a step toward the stairs, then stopped when I raised a finger. She stayed at the edge like a drawn line. The phone vibrated once on the mantel. Unknown number. The message was short and careful. The gates open, came the answer I wanted. I slid the phone into my pocket and nodded at her feet. She went to the bench, pulled on shoes without tying them. I took my coat from the peg and didn't put it on. The night pressed at the glass. I typed one word and sent it. Then I turned the extractor on low and opened the drawer with the torch. She took a breath to speak and I lifted a finger without looking at her. The fan hid small decisions. We went to the back. I unlocked the door and let the cold step in first. She stopped at the threshold. I stepped onto the slabs and left the kitchen light to draw the lines. The gate waited with a small sway. A shoe scuffed on gravel beyond the fence. I didn't turn. I lifted the torch and let it paint the hinge. When the figure came through the gap, I said to stop and he did. His hand twitched toward a pocket and stayed there. She didn't move. She fixed her gaze on the gate latch and kept it there. He looked past me to her and then back, quick and guilty. He had the wrong idea about who I was. You know where you are, I said, and shifted my weight so his path was mine. Her sleeves slid down over the marks she never explained. He looked for a plan and found a fence. Inside, I said to her, and didn't break the line between me and him. She took one step, then another, then brushed my arm and disappeared into the light. The door closed on its own hinge. He waited for me to talk first. I let the silence do the measure. Then I held up the torch beam and the screen it lit. This number. It ends now, I said, and he caught the name he'd been using. His mouth closed on the wrong sentence. He didn't offer the phone, so I reached and took it. He looked at the hand, then at my face, and then let go. It wasn't courage. It was the end of a small job. Gate stays shut, I said, and eased the wood back into the post. The latch dropped with the sound I'd been waiting for. He took one step back into the alley. Don't come to my house again, I said, and watched to see if he believed me. He nodded once and turned his shoulder to me like a shield. He chose the outside. I put a new lock through the hasp and turned it until it bit. The garden went quiet again, just water and air. I went inside and shut the door without touching the light. She stood halfway up the stairs with a coat over one arm. The front of her shirt had a damp crescent where she'd pressed her hand. The house had drawn itself tight around her. I placed both phones on the mantel and faced her. She didn't ask who he was. She watched my hands and waited for the part that mattered. We were done with gates. She stayed on the step and lifted the coat higher on her arm. I moved the phones so they touched and waited. The room held the sound of her breathing like a faucet with a slow leak. "Come down," I said, without lifting my eyes. She moved one step and stopped, fingers tightening on the rail. She kept her weight on the back foot. I picked up her phone and held it out. "Open it." She didn't take it, but her hand moved toward her shirt again, flat against the crescent. She watched the glass the way people watch a ledge. She said, "Why do you have his?" Very low, as if the carpet might tell on her. I set both back on the mantel and straightened one so they made a perfect line. The question had no weight left. I took the coat off her arm without touching her and shook it once. A fob tapped the floor and spun. She didn't reach for it. It was a dull gray oval with a 4-digit stamp and a blue smudge. "What door?" I asked, bending for it. She kept staring past me at the unlit fireplace like there was a pilot flame we'd both forgotten. She gave the slowest shake of her head. I emptied the pockets onto the mantel. Key with a rubber cap. Folded receipt. Small USB wrapped in clear tape. Her hand crept once toward the USB, then curled back. The house went quieter. "You were going to leave," I said, just to locate the line. She glanced up the stairs and then down to the fob. Her mouth opened and closed without sound, like she was adjusting to water. I unlocked her phone with my thumb against the back camera, so it thought it saw skin. She flinched at the click. I scrolled until a name sat by itself at the top, unmarked and clean. He had used a number that didn't wear a name. She had given him a letter and a space. I tapped it and let it ring in the other phone beside it. Both sat there singing like a small machine. She reached and stopped, the muscles along her wrist lifting like wire. "Don't," she said, but not at me. The sound cut, and the second phone lit, then settled. She knew what silence meant. "What did you tell him about the fob?" I asked. Her eyes went to the rubber cap and then to my shoes. She pressed her palm harder into the damp on her shirt. The cap looked chewed. "He thinks you'll be late," she said, standing straighter as if that helped. I looked at the clock we never set right, and then at her shoes turned in toward the riser. Late was a habit. I put the fob in my pocket and took the USB into my hand. The tape had lint stuck in one corner. "You packed before you said the words aloud," I said, laying the fact between us. She breathed once through her nose. "We can end it here," she said, which was not a plea. I set the USB back down and picked up the key so the teeth faced her. "Ending things is not a switch. You're coming with me," I said, picking up both phones and turning toward the door. She didn't move for a beat, then stepped down so light it barely counted. We were past the part where pretending buys you time. She kept a step behind me through the hall, bare feet silent on the runner. I locked the door without looking at her and pocketed the key and both phones. The deadbolt settled like a period. In the elevator, she watched the floor numbers rise and fall in the chrome. Her hands were empty and still, which meant they weren't. When the doors opened, we didn't wait. The garage breathed cold air and old oil. I opened the passenger door and held it as long as it took for her to understand the shape of tonight. She sat and pulled the belt slow, as if silence needed buckling too. I set both phones in the cup holder screen down and drove out without the radio. The city was a grid. You follow lines until they intersect. The key in my pocket tapped my thigh with each stoplight. The storage place hummed with strip lights and low cameras. She looked up once, quick, then down like that wasn't what she was doing. I entered the gate code without asking where she kept it. The hallway was painted the color of no one. Doors on both sides, metal mouths waiting for noise. We stopped at 117 because the tag in my pocket said we would. She stopped half a pace short of the door. Her mouth moved before sound. "We don't have to." She reached for the lock like it might agree with her. I put the key in and turned it before her fingers got there. The shackle lifted and the door rolled with a rattle that made her shoulders go tight. Dust smelled like a plan left too long. There was a blue backpack, a stack of banker boxes, a coat folded the careful way you do when you're not coming back. A roll of bills bound with a rubber band, not hidden well because speed was the point. On top, a driver's license with her picture and a last name she didn't use with me. She touched the coat sleeve like counting stitches. "I was going to tell you," she said into her hands instead of me. She wasn't, and this was the proof. I set the license down and opened the first box. Receipts sorted by highlighter, leases printed and signed, a second lease stamped for a unit across the river starting next month. The dates were more honest than anyone in the room. Under the papers, a small fireproof safe sat like a square truth. I held up the second key and watched her look at the floor. Her throat moved once and stopped. The safe clicked and swung open with no ceremony. Inside, a sealed envelope with my initials written too neat, a twin USB capped and clean, a stack of photos turned face down, and a medical printout clipped with a plastic heart from a clinic that pretends detached kindness. Careful plans make a clean mess. I picked up the envelope and waited, then tore the top in one pull. The paper inside was typed, short lines, no greeting. If I flinched, it didn't show anywhere I couldn't see. I set the printed words aside and flipped the photo stack. Us in rooms with good lighting, edges cut off, smiles that didn't reach her left eye. Her thumb pressed down on one like it might keep it from happening again. At the bottom was the grayscale image that doesn't need color to end a conversation. Her name printed in the corner, date in a month that matched the days she started watching the clock. The field for father was a line that never got filled. I laid the grayscale on the table and lined the corners with the others. The kitchen light was too bright for the hour. The blank field stared up like a question with space to breathe. Her key scraped the lock, stopped, turned again. She stepped in, quiet shoes, bag against her hip. The bolt took her keys with a clean click. She saw the spread and paused mid-step. Her hand hovered, not touching, not pulling back. Air thinned between us. I slid the image toward her with 2 fingers. My nail tapped the date. I didn't look up when I spoke. Why is this blank? She kept her eyes on the paper like it was the only safe surface in the room. They said it can be filled later. The words came out level, small. The month on the corner sat wrong in my head. The weeks we weren't in the same bed stood up and counted. She didn't correct the count. She backed into the chair and caught it with her calf. We were in separate rooms, she said, crisp and flat. She kept her thumb on her palm until the skin went white. Is it mine? The chair legs creaked under her hand. I kept it blank to not mislead anyone, she said, picked clean of extras. The drawer stuck, then gave. The pen felt heavier than plastic should. I clicked it once and the sound walked around the tile. Don't do this because of guilt, she said, eyes on the metal clip. I don't keep score in here. The pen balanced on my knuckle. Do you want me gone? She bit the inside of her cheek and kept her gaze on the edge of the table. I want quiet, she said, barely moving her lips. Quiet is a choice in a wall. I pulled the paper closer and found the line waiting in black. The first letter went down without shaking. Ink spread into the fiber and didn't leak. The name took the space and locked it. The tip pressed through hard enough to mark the wood. I turned the page over and slid it back in the thin envelope. I pushed it to her side and stacked the rest by size. Tomorrow needs a time. She set the bag down and let the strap fall. Water ran at the sink without need. Steam climbed and stayed near her face. I cut the kitchen light and the room stepped back into itself. The hall made a line to the door with no obstacles. We would keep the appointment.